payload of bombs. That's how Donald Trump is describing a US attack on Iran tonight. The president claiming he's obliterated the country's nuclear capabilities.
I can report to the world that the strikes were a spectacular military success.
3 US strikes, 3 Iranian nuclear facilities, Natanz, Esfahan, and most importantly, Fordow.
Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated.
That claim constituting a major feat. Fordow, buried deep beneath a mountain, is at the heart of Iran's nuclear program. The US, the only country with bunker-busting bombs capable of destroying it.
There's no military in the world that could have done what we did tonight, not even close.
Congratulations, President Trump. Your bold decision to target Iran's nuclear facilities with the awesome and righteous might of the United States will change history.
The attacks come after days camped out in the White House's Situation Room amid wild speculation over Trump's next move.
As the president said, he would decide within 2 weeks. However, 2 days is within 2 weeks.
The fact that President Trump authorized strikes on these 2 other nuclear facilities as well indicates that he wanted to make sure that this job was done.
Iran playing down the attacks, claiming all sites had been evacuated. None contained radioactive material and that Fordow has suffered no irreversible damage. Threats now flying from all sides, Trump putting Iran on notice.
Iran, the bully of the Middle East, must now make peace. If they do not, future attacks will be far greater and a lot easier.
Iran says the US started a dangerous war and is vowing vengeance, saying no US citizen in the Middle East, including its 40,000 service members, is safe.
There's a lot of fear as to what escalation this can cause in the region. There are other regional actors who could potentially get dragged into this as well.
The UN begging all parties to calm down.
At this perilous hour, it is critical to avoid a spiral of chaos. There is no military solution. The only path forward is diplomacy. The only hope is peace.
So with tensions at an all-time high, is it now too late to avoid all-out war?
CEO of the US Studies Centre, Michael Green, is here to give us his take on the situation. Michael, is America at war?
Well, dropping 30,000-pound bunker-busting bombs on a nuclear site is an act of war. So in that sense, yes, but the US Congress hasn't declared war. And I think, reading from President Trump's statements, the U.S. intention is to have this end now. So yes and no. The goal in the U.S. and I think the goal of U.S. allies should be to make sure there's no further escalation and no war between the U.S. and Iran.
Well, given what Iran has said, a statement released within the last couple of hours or so, it looks like they're ready to fight back.
Well, that's not at all surprising. Remember, this is a regime that has called for the destruction of Israel, the death of America, has attempted to overturn friendly states all across the Gulf. It's an extremely dangerous regime. So the rhetoric's not surprising. The question is, what will Iran actually do? And, you know, in an earlier time, I think people would have been very worried about Hamas or Hezbollah acting as proxies for Iran to attack the U.S., Israel, and others, or would have worried about Iranian missiles. But their proxies are in disarray because of Israeli attacks. Their missiles are being depleted. The Iranian air defense system is close to destroyed. So Iran is not in a very strong position to escalate into a wider war. What they might do is assassination or terrorism. So we're not, you know, out of the woods yet. This was a risky move by President Trump, but not as risky as it might seem at first glance. Iran's ability to actually prosecute a larger war is very limited right now.
So, yeah, risky move. Why did Trump pull the trigger on it? I think it took a lot of people by surprise.
You know, the strategic case for this move, I alluded to earlier, which is the Iranian nuclear weapons capability, was unacceptable. There was an apparent disagreement between the U.S. and Israel on how close they were to weapons. But in some ways, if you're Israel or if you're worried about Iranian intentions, it doesn't matter. So that's the strategic case. What we don't know is the timing. And, you know, I worked in the White House for 5 years. There's a deliberative process for these things. And Donald Trump doesn't do that. He sort of makes snap decisions. There is a strategic case to be made for this. I think people will be asking, well, what was the real reason? And I don't know the answer.
What's the likelihood of Iran striking US targets around the Middle East, do you think?
Well, You know, the Iranian chief of intelligence, the head of the Quds force, was taken out by drones in Iraq a few years ago because he was in the country preparing for an attack on the U.S. embassy in Baghdad. I used to eat lunch in Washington, D.C. at a restaurant that was famous because Iran was preparing to blow up the Saudi ambassador at that restaurant. So we know that Iran can be quite violent, and we know that they're probably motivated to have revenge. On the other hand, as I said, their air defenses are depleted. They're on their back. And it was interesting when President Trump said somewhat crudely, we know where the leader of Iran, Ayatollah Khamenei, is, and we could take him out. It sounded like bravado, but it also might have been a deterrent. Don't escalate, because we could do bad things to you. So I'm not sure that I don't think Iran can broaden the war. They'll be looking for ways to retaliate, but their options will be limited.
Donald Trump famously campaigned as the anti-war president. A lot of his voting base valued that about him. If there is a response and this starts to escalate, how far do you think he would go? Is it possible we would see US boots on the ground here?
Yeah, I don't think there's a likelihood of US boots on the ground. This is not Iraq. This is not regime change. Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel has used the word regime change, but that's not what Donald Trump is trying to do. It's not what the American public would support. Memories of Iraq are still fresh in everyone's mind. The politics, look, it's very interesting. Trump's coalition is full of contradictions. There are pro-Israel war hawks. There are anti-interventionist isolationists. What people are realizing is Trump doesn't answer to them. He does what he wants. And frankly, the anti-war isolationists are very unhappy, but they don't have much power without Donald Trump. So I think he feels comfortable he can make the decision.
Dr. Michael Green, thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
There are fears the Middle East is on the brink of war as Iran issues a stark message to the US, warning the strikes on 3 Iranian nuclear sites will have everlasting consequences.
There will be either peace or there will be tragedy for Iran far greater than we have witnessed over the last 8 days. Remember, there are many targets left.
6 bunker buster bombs have been dropped on Iran's Fordow, Natanz and Isfahan nuclear facilities using America's B-2 bombers. Fordow was the primary target. It's here that Israel and the US allege Iran had been developing nuclear weapons, a claim Tehran denies. Trump claims these key sites have now been totally obliterated and has warned Iran that it must make peace or else. Now, Iran is vowing vengeance, with its foreign minister warning the country has the right to defend its sovereignty, interest and people. Meanwhile, Israel's Benjamin Netanyahu was quick to praise the US's efforts.
History will record that President Trump acted to deny the world's most dangerous regime the world's most dangerous weapons.
What's the significance of these targets?
Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated.
That claimed obliteration, a steep escalation of the conflict in Iran. American aircraft entering the fray, bombing nuclear sites in Isfahan, Natanz and Fordow.
Everybody heard those names for years as they built this horribly destructive enterprise.
Of those facilities, Fordow is considered the centrepiece of Iran's nuclear program, buried an estimated 90 metres inside a mountain south of Tehran and originally a facility for the Revolutionary Guard. It was converted to a nuclear site in the early 2000s. Its location considered impenetrable to all weapons, save for America's 13-ton bunker buster bombs capable of penetrating 61 metres below the surface before exploding.
Iran, the bully of the Middle East, must now make peace.
But Iran has contradicted Trump, saying Fordow has been evacuated and had not suffered irreversible damage, suggesting the nuclear program Israel had been warning of might still be alive.
If not stopped, Iran could produce a nuclear weapon in a very short time. It could be a year, it could be within a few months.
This is a claim Netanyahu has been making for more than a decade. US intelligence says that while Iran's uranium enrichment was, quote, unprecedented for a state without nuclear weapons, there was no actual evidence any weapon was being built.
The IC continues to assess that Iran is not building a nuclear weapon, and Supreme Leader Khamenei has not authorized the nuclear weapons program that he suspended in 2003.
That assessment rebuffed by Donald Trump.
Who in the intelligence community said that?
your Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard.
She's wrong.
Just how far back these bombings will set the country's nuclear program is dividing analysts.
Now, given that those centrifuges were destroyed, their capability to do it in the short term, at least 20 years at this point now, is completely over.
That does not end Iran's nuclear ambitions.
Right.
It just delays them. So a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, we're right back in the same place.
So is this really the end of the nuclear threat in Iran, or the beginning of a dangerous new chapter?
Well, James Acton is a physicist and co-director of the Nuclear Policy Program at Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. He joins us now. James, is it likely the US has destroyed the Fordo facility?
My only honest answer to that is I don't know. The president has said that the operation was very successful. I would certainly like to wait until we get good satellite imagery and other data in the hours after the sun rises in Iran tomorrow. So I'd actually, I don't think it's too helpful to speculate until we get that more data in.
How important is this particular site to Iran's nuclear program?
Well, in one sense, it's profoundly important. Iran's enrichment facilities at Natanz and at Fordo are the means by which Iran can enrich uranium to the level necessary to build a nuclear weapon. So there's no question that the attack against this facility is a significant setback. On the other hand, Iran does have the ability to reconstitute its program. Components for building centrifuges haven't been monitored by the IAEA since the Iran deal fell apart. Iran's stockpile of highly enriched uranium may very well have survived this attack. And so my big concern here is that even in spite of the destruction or the probable destruction of Iran's enrichment plants, it will retain the capability to reconstitute its program and build a nuclear weapon.
James, this might be a stupid question, but if you're using nuclear material for civilian purposes, you need plants, you need a lot of stuff in order to create nuclear power. When you're building a bomb, how much space do you need?
Well, not very much. Enrichment plant, which is what is the route that Iran is going down, can be relatively small. From the outside, they can just look like any old industrial facility. Now, in the case of Iran's enrichment plant, they were built underground precisely to try to avoid them being bombed, possibly unsuccessfully. But these are relatively modestly sized facilities. And so looking forward, Iran doesn't need massive industrial scale facilities in order to produce enough highly enriched uranium for a bomb.
Okay, so this is kind of the basis of my question. This attack is not a secret in the sense that it's been building for a while. We had the 2-week deadline, that turned out not to be true, but the idea that an attack was coming is not a new one. If you don't need much space to create a bomb, is it possible Iran would have just moved all or plenty of the nuclear material it had to another location so that this bombing is ineffective?
Yes, absolutely. In the case of Iran's highly enriched uranium, it had built up a stockpile of this material, which is a relatively short step from the level of enrichment needed to build a nuclear weapon. That highly enriched uranium is in a gaseous form that's stored in something that's very much the same size and shape as scuba tanks. These are not physically big objects. Iran could easily have moved this material. We've seen some statements from the Iranians, in fact, saying that they have already moved this material. And precisely because it's carried around in these scuba tank-sized things, it's potentially very difficult to track this material. So I think the concern that today's strike may have been successful in destroying individual facilities, but been unsuccessful in dealing anything close to a fatal blow to the Iranian nuclear program is unfortunately a very realistic fear right now.
Okay, so all that taken into consideration and adding the fact that Iran is a massive country, is there anything that the US or Israel or both together could do to get rid of Iran's nuclear program that doesn't involve a full-scale invasion, troops on the ground and a long-range war that would be, I don't know, something similar to perhaps what we saw in Iraq?
I have to be honest with you, I don't see a good option right now. Prior to the US bombing, I still think there was a possibility of a diplomatic settlement. There was a slim possibility, but it was a real possibility. Now that the United States has attacked Iran this evening, I think the prospects of a diplomatic settlement are out of the window. The option the United States and Iran and Israel now have is to try to detect any reconstitution activities, to periodically attack Iran again and again, what's been euphemistically called mowing the grass. Unfortunately, I don't expect that to succeed. And so, as you say, the only option which I find horrific is the possibility of invading and occupying Iran, which I strongly oppose and which I think is inconceivable.
James, we appreciate your time. Thank you.